My name is Madison, and my story begins when my mom married my dad, though he wasn't just my dad at the time. He was also Kayla's dad, having gone through a divorce when Kayla was only 2. Looking back, I have to admit our family situation was pretty unique. Unlike the stereotypical evil stepmother scenario you see in movies, my mom actually got along great with Kayla's mom. They'd chat on the phone, coordinate visits, and even have coffee together sometimes. Kayla would come over on weekends and holidays, and initially, everything was perfect. We were close in age, and despite being stepsisters, we clicked immediately. We'd spend hours playing together, sharing secrets, and doing all the things sisters do. I remember how we'd build blanket forts in the living room and stay up late watching movies, trying to stifle our giggles so our parents wouldn't hear us. But as we got older, things started to change. High school brought new friends, different interests, and slowly but surely, we began drifting apart. Kayla found her own crowd, and I noticed she was becoming, well, less tidy would be putting it mildly. "Kayla, could you please pick up your stuff from the bathroom?" I'd ask, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice. Yeah, I'll do it later," she'd reply, not even looking up from her phone. But later never seemed to come. Instead, my mom would eventually tell me to clean up after her. "Madison, honey, just take care of it," Mom would say. "She's our guest, after all." I'd grit my teeth and do it, but each time it happened, a tiny seed of resentment took root. Still, I kept my mouth shut. What else could I do? Even then, I was the responsible one, the one who understood the importance of maintaining peace in our blended family. After high school, I threw myself into college life. I worked hard, studied harder, and started saving every penny I could from my part-time jobs. My grandparents, Mom's parents, were always supportive, telling me how proud they were of my independence. After graduation, I landed a good job, the kind with benefits and regular hours. The pay was decent enough that I could start looking for my own place, though renting at first. Every month, I'd put aside a chunk of my salary, watching my savings grow slowly but surely. My parents were supportive too, in their own way. They'd stop by my rental apartment with home-cooked meals and random household items they thought I might need. But it was my grandparents who really helped make my dream of homeownership a reality. Between my savings, their generous contribution, and my parents' help with renovation costs and furniture, I finally bought my own place. That first night in my new apartment, I stood in the middle of my living room, breathing in the fresh paint smell and feeling like I'd finally made it. Everything was exactly where I wanted it, including the antique dining set my great-grandmother had left me and the expensive bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. 6 months after I moved in, Mom called. "Honey, I need to ask you a favor," she said over the phone. Her voice had that sweet, careful tone she uses when she wants something big. "It's about Kayla." I felt my stomach tighten. "What about her?" "She's found a job here in the city. Isn't that wonderful?" Mom paused for effect. "But she needs a place to stay while she gets settled. Just for a couple of months." I gripped my phone tighter. "Mom. She can't afford rent yet, and you have that spare room," Mom continued. "It would mean so much to all of us. You know how hard it is starting out." I closed my eyes, remembering all those times Kayla had left our house looking like a tornado hit it when we were younger. But maybe she'd grown up. Maybe she'd changed. It was only for 2 months, right? "Okay," I heard myself say. "But just for 2 months." "Oh, sweetie, thank you. You're such a good sister," Mom gushed. "Kayla will be there tomorrow." Kayla breezed in with 4 massive suitcases and immediately started unpacking, by which I mean she started throwing her clothes everywhere. Within an hour, my pristine living room looked like a clothing bomb had exploded. That night, I came home from work to find dirty dishes piled in the sink and half-eaten takeout containers scattered across the kitchen counter. Kayla was sprawled on my couch, watching TV. "Hey, could you wash your dishes?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "I'll get to it," she said, not looking away from the screen. She never got to it. Days passed, and the situation only got worse. One morning, I opened my closet to find several of my favorite outfits missing. I found them later, in Kayla's room, crumpled on the floor. "What the hell, Kayla?" I confronted her. "Why are you taking my clothes without asking?" She rolled her eyes. "Come on, we're the same size. Don't be so uptight about it. We're sisters, remember?" "Sisters ask permission," I muttered, but she was already walking away. The final straw was the food situation. I'd always enjoyed cooking, making enough for leftovers to take to work the next day. But now, I'd come home to find everything I'd made the night before completely gone, with nothing prepared in return. "Kayla, you can't keep eating all the food without contributing," I said one evening, standing in front of my empty fridge. She looked up from her phone, annoyed. "I'm a guest here, Madison. You're the host, you're supposed to take care of your guests. Besides, this isn't even my kitchen. Guest or not, you need to help out," I insisted. "Whatever," she shrugged. "If you're going to be so weird about it, I'll just order takeout." I stood there, watching her scroll through her delivery apps, feeling my blood pressure rise. This wasn't what I'd signed up for. But every time I thought about confronting her more seriously, I heard my mom's voice in my head, "You're such a good sister." 2 weeks into this nightmare of cohabitation, I was already counting down the days until my apartment would be mine again. Work had been particularly rough that day, and all I wanted was to come home, heat up some leftovers, if there were any, and collapse on my couch. Instead, I walked into darkness. At first, I thought maybe Kayla had finally gone out for the evening, giving me some peace and quiet. But then I noticed the flickering light coming from my living room. As I turned the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, at my dining table, using my great-grandmother's antique dining set that I barely used myself because of how precious it was to me, sat Kayla and some guy I'd never seen before. Candles were lit everywhere, creating what was supposed to be a romantic atmosphere. They were leaning in close to each other, giggling and kissing between bites of what looked like takeout arranged on my family heirlooms. But what really made my blood boil was the open bottle on the table, my bottle. The expensive wine I'd been saving for a special occasion, now half empty between these two strangers. I slapped the light switch on. "What the hell is this?" Kayla jumped, then rolled her eyes when she saw it was me. "Oh my God, Madison, you scared us." "Who is this?" I demanded, pointing at the guy who was now giving me an annoyed look. "And why are you using my great-grandmother's china? And that wine was expensive and saved for a special occasion." "This is Derek," Kayla said casually, as if this was all perfectly normal. "And this is a special occasion, it's our third date." "I don't care if it's your wedding dinner. You have no right to bring strangers into my home without asking, and you definitely have no right to use my things without permission." Derek cleared his throat. "Hey, we're trying to have a romantic evening here. Could you give us some privacy? Maybe go grab coffee somewhere or stay at a friend's place tonight?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Excuse me?" "Yeah," Kayla chimed in, wrapping an arm around Derek's shoulders. "We'd appreciate some alone time. It's not cool to crash someone's date like this." "Crash someone's date? This is my apartment. Come on, sis," Kayla whined. "Don't be such a buzzkill. We just want to spend some quality time together." "Quality time? Get out." I pointed at Derek. "You need to leave right now." "Or what?" Derek smirked. "Or I'm calling the police and having you removed for trespassing." "You wouldn't dare," Kayla gasped. I pulled out my phone and started dialing. "Try me." Derek's smirk vanished. He stood up, grabbing his jacket. "Whatever. This is ridiculous, I'm out of here." "Derek, wait," Kayla called after him as he headed for the door. She turned to glare at me. "Thanks a lot, Madison. Thanks for ruining everything." She grabbed her purse and stormed out after him, slamming the door so hard my pictures rattled on the walls. My phone rang early the next morning. Mom's name flashed across the screen, and I already knew this wasn't going to be good. How could you? She started before I could even say hello. Your own sister. Mom, let me explain. Explain what? How you humiliated that poor girl in front of her date. How you threatened to call the police on her. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Did she tell you she was using great-grandma's china? Or that she opened my expensive wine without asking? Oh, Madison, Mom's voice dripped with disappointment. When did you become so selfish? So arrogant? Your sister is trying to build a life here, and you're treating her like a criminal. She brought a complete stranger into my home without. She's an unhappy girl who needs her family's support right now. But clearly, you're too wrapped up in your own little world to see that. Before I could defend myself further, Mom hung up. I stared at my phone, feeling a mixture of anger and hurt bubbling up inside me. But I didn't have long to process, because barely an hour later, my phone rang again. This time it was Kayla's mom. Madison, her voice was sharp. We need to talk about your behavior. My behavior? I couldn't help but laugh. What about Kayla's behavior? You know, ever since you bought that apartment, you've changed. Become arrogant, selfish. That's not fair. Not fair? I'll tell you what's not fair. Have you forgotten when you and your mother first moved here? You stayed at our house for 2 weeks. Kayla and I treated you both with nothing but respect. We didn't kick you out or threaten to call the police on you. That was completely different, I protested. We didn't trash your house or use your personal belongings without permission. Look, I come home exhausted from work every day, and instead of resting, I'm cleaning up after Kayla. She doesn't wash dishes, doesn't do laundry. You're being too strict with her, Kayla's mom cut me off. She tells me how hard it is living with you, how biased you are against her. These are little things, Madison. You need to stop being so uptight about every little thing. Little things? It's about basic respect. She doesn't appreciate anything I do, doesn't respect my home or my belongings. She's your sister. Well, if she doesn't like living with me, she's welcome to leave my apartment right now. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. I see, Kayla's mom's voice turned ice cold. I'll be speaking to your father and mother about this. Don't think this is over. The line went dead. I sat there, my hands shaking with frustration. How had I become the villain in this story? All I wanted was some basic respect and consideration in my own home. Was that really too much to ask? My phone rang again a few hours later. Mom's name flashed on the screen for the second time that day. I almost didn't answer, but I knew ignoring her would only make things worse. My finger hovered over the decline button for a moment before I finally accepted the call, bracing myself for what was coming. What is wrong with you? She didn't even say hello. I just got off the phone with Kayla's mother. She's incredibly upset. I slumped onto my couch, feeling a headache starting to form. Mom, do you have any idea how hard I've worked to maintain this relationship with her? Your father's ex-wife and I have always gotten along wonderfully. I'm proud of that. And now you're ruining everything. Do you know how rare it is for divorced families to get along like we do? I'm ruining everything? I sat up straight, my voice rising. Mom, you promised me Kayla wouldn't interfere with my life. You said I'd barely see her because she'd be at work all day. Well, guess what? It's been 2 weeks, and she hasn't gone to a single job interview. Not one. She's looking. No, she's not. She stays home all day, making a mess of my apartment, and bringing random guys over. You want to know what she's really doing? She sits on my couch all day watching TV shows and ordering takeout. She doesn't wash her clothes, doesn't cook, doesn't clean, won't even wash a single dish. Every day I come home from work to complete chaos. Do you know what it's like to work a full day and come home to find your kitchen destroyed and all your food eaten? Honey, Mom's voice took on that condescending tone I hated, the one she used when she thought she was being the voice of reason. Kayla isn't used to living independently. She doesn't know how to do these things yet. She's never had to take care of herself before. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I paced around my living room, stepping over Kayla's discarded shoes. She's an adult, Mom. She should know how to wash a dish. These aren't complicated skills we're talking about. This is basic human courtesy. You're the hostess, Madison. It's your responsibility to be hospitable and take care of your guests. This attitude of yours. I didn't raise you to be like this. I raised you to be generous and kind, especially to family. I felt the frustration building in my chest as my mother continued lecturing me about hospitality and family duty. Every word just reminded me of the constant disrespect I'd been enduring in my own home. The wine stains on my carpet caught my eye, remnants from Kayla's romantic dinner, and something inside me finally snapped. You know what, Mom? I interrupted her mid-sentence, my voice rising with every word. I'm done trying to explain this to you. I'm done being the responsible one, the understanding one, the one who has to accommodate everything. I'm just completely tired of. I took a deep breath, my next words coming out in a burst of anger. I'm tired of Kayla behaving like a pig in my house. The moment those words left my mouth, I heard a small gasp behind me. My stomach dropped as I slowly turned around. There was Kayla, standing in the doorway, her face pale and her eyes wide. She must have come back to get something and heard everything. The look on her face made my anger evaporate instantly, replaced by a sickening wave of guilt. Kayla, I started, but she was already turning away. Madison, what's happening? My mom's voice was still coming through the phone, but I barely heard her. I watched, frozen in place, as Kayla walked straight to her room. I could hear her opening drawers and moving around. Within minutes, though it felt like hours, she emerged with her suitcases, the same ones she'd arrived with just 2 weeks ago. She didn't look at me as she walked past, didn't say a word. The only sound was the rolling of her suitcase wheels across my hardwood floors and then the soft click of the front door closing behind her. I stood there in the sudden silence, my phone still in my hand, my mother's voice a distant murmur. I hung up without saying goodbye. The following days were eerily quiet. No calls from my mother, no angry messages from Kayla's mom, nothing. The silence was worse than the arguing had been. I knew Kayla must have told her mother what happened, and her mother must have told mine, but no one was saying anything to me. The weight of that silence pressed down on me every day as I moved through my now spotless apartment. A week passed like this, until there was a knock at my door one evening. I opened it to find both my parents standing there. Mom's face was set in that expression I remembered from childhood, the one that meant I was in serious trouble. Dad looked tired. They came in, and Mom didn't waste any time. Do you have any idea what you've done? She started, pacing my living room. Calling your sister a pig? Making her feel so unwelcome that she had to leave in the middle of the night? I didn't raise you to be cruel, Madison. She continued listing my sins, each one delivered like a prosecutor at trial. I noticed Dad hadn't said anything yet, just stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking around my apartment. Mom noticed too. She turned to him suddenly. Why are you just standing there silent? Say something to your daughter. Tell her how disappointed you are. Dad cleared his throat, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Actually, he said slowly, I think both of our daughters are wrong in this situation. What? Mom and I said simultaneously. Madison, he turned to me, his voice gentle but firm, calling your sister a pig was wrong. It was hurtful, and it's the reason she left. You need to apologize for that. I nodded, feeling the shame fresh again. But, he continued, holding up a hand as Mom started to speak, I otherwise support Madison in this. Kayla needs to learn to behave like an adult, like an independent person. Maybe it will be the push she needs to start taking responsibility for her own life. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for our children is to let them face the consequences of their actions. My mother's face turned red. Oh, so now you want to parent? Where were you when I was helping Kayla find a job? When I was coordinating with her mother? Why do I have to take care of your eldest daughter more than you do? That's not fair, Dad started, but Mom cut him off. You know what's not fair? You sitting back silent all these years while I worked to keep this family together. Well, congratulations, now you can deal with your daughters yourself. Then she turned back to me, her anger finding a new target. And you? You think you can just throw your sister out whenever you feel like it? This is my property, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I can do what I want with it. Mom laughed, but there was no humor in it. Your property? You think you did this all by yourself? Almost everything in this apartment was bought with our money. She gestured wildly around the room before pointing dramatically at the bookcase against the wall. That bookcase belonged to my grandmother. It's a family heirloom, which means it's my furniture, not yours. I stood there for a moment, looking at the bookcase my mother was pointing at. Then, without a word, I walked over to it and started taking the books off the shelves. What are you doing? Mom demanded. Packing up your furniture, I replied, my hands shaking slightly as I continued emptying the shelves. I went to my storage closet and pulled out some moving boxes I'd kept from when I first moved in. Madison, stop this, Dad said quietly, but I ignored him. Don't worry, Mom, I said, starting to break down the bookcase. A courier will deliver this to your house tomorrow. Since it's your furniture, you should have it. Mom grabbed her purse. I can't deal with this right now. This isn't the daughter I raised. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Dad stood there awkwardly for a moment. Madison. You should go after her, Dad. He nodded sadly, then followed Mom out. I heard him call for a taxi in the hallway. True to my word, I had the bookcase delivered to my mother's house the next day. After that, silence fell over our family again. No calls, no texts, no family dinners. Just silence. A month passed like this. I threw myself into work, trying not to think about how everything had fallen apart. Then one afternoon, my phone lit up with my dad's number. Can we meet for coffee? He asked. That little cafe near your office? Sure, I agreed, grateful that at least someone in my family was still talking to me. But when I walked into the cafe the next day, I stopped short. There at the table with my father sat Kayla, nervously stirring a cup of coffee. For a moment, I considered turning around and walking out, but Dad had already seen me and waved me over. I took a deep breath and approached the table. No one spoke as I sat down. Kayla stared into her coffee cup, and I focused on arranging my purse on the back of my chair. Dad cleared his throat but didn't say anything. The awkward silence stretched on until a waitress came to take my order, giving us all a moment to collect ourselves. Finally, Kayla looked up. So, she started, then paused to take a breath. I got a job. That's great, I managed. Yeah, it is. And I found my own apartment. It's small, but it's nice. I can actually afford it now with my new salary. She smiled slightly. And, I'm still dating Derek. He thinks it's hilarious now. Keeps calling you the fighting girl. Says he's never seen anyone go from zero to calling the cops so fast. Despite everything, I found myself chuckling. Well, he was being pretty obnoxious. He was, Kayla admitted. We both were. She set down her coffee cup and looked me directly in the eyes. Madison, I'm really sorry. For everything. The mess, the disrespect, using your things without asking. I was acting like a spoiled teenager instead of an adult. I felt something tight in my chest begin to loosen. I'm sorry too. I shouldn't have called you a pig. That was cruel, and I regret it. I was just so frustrated. I know. I gave you plenty of reasons to be frustrated. Kayla reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Living on my own now, having to actually take care of everything myself, I get it. I get why you were so angry about the dishes, and the cleaning, and everything else. Since that day at the cafe, Kayla and I have been rebuilding our relationship. We meet for coffee regularly now, and she's actually become quite good at keeping her new apartment clean. She even invited me over for dinner recently, cooked it herself and everything. Things with Mom, though, that's a different story. Dad tells me she's not ready to reconcile yet. She needs time to think, he says, but I know it's more complicated than that. Mom has always prided herself on maintaining the perfect blended family, and I think my conflict with Kayla shattered that illusion for her. I stand by my actions, though. Yes, I could have handled some things better, but I don't believe I owe an apology to Mom or Kayla's mother for expecting basic respect in my own home. Yesterday, something interesting happened. A courier delivered a familiar bookcase to my apartment, the same one I'd sent to Mom months ago, in a fit of anger. There was no note, no explanation, just the bookcase. As I stood there looking at it, I couldn't help but wonder if this was Mom's way of extending an olive branch. I haven't called her about it yet. Some wounds need more time to heal, and some conversations need the right moment. For now, I put the bookcase back in its old spot, and every time I look at it, I think about how families are like books. Sometimes they need to be taken apart and put back together before they can stand properly again.
He said, his tone suddenly jovial. Dad's just visiting. Go back to bed. I wrenched my arm free. Elliot, go to your room and lock the door. Now. Sean's face contorted with anger. Don't you dare turn my son against me. You've done that all on your own, I shot back. He lunged forward, but his drunken state made him clumsy. I sidestepped easily, and he stumbled into the coffee table, sending it crashing to the floor. That's it, I said, grabbing my phone. I'm calling the police. Sean struggled to his feet, panic replacing anger. Wait, Liv, please. I'm sorry, okay? I'll go. I paused, my finger hovering over the call button. This is the last time, Sean. If you ever come here again, I'll file for a restraining order. He nodded, backing towards the door. I get it. I'll make things right. As the door closed behind him, I sank onto the couch, my hands shaking. Elliot's tentative footsteps on the stairs made me look up. Is Dad gone? He asked, his voice small. I nodded, forcing a smile. Yeah, sweetie, he's gone. Everything's okay now. But as I held my son close, I knew nothing was okay. Sean's intrusion had shattered more than just my sense of security. It had confirmed my worst fears about how far he'd fallen and how much danger he might pose to our son. I needed a plan, and I knew just who to call for help. I paced the kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the endless ringing. Come on, Isabel, I muttered. Pick up. Finally, a click. Hello. Isabel's voice was groggy with sleep. Isabel, it's Olivia. I'm sorry to call so early, but it's about Sean. There was a sharp intake of breath. What's he done now? I recounted the night's events, my voice shaking. As I spoke, I could hear Isabel's breathing quicken. That boy, she said when I finished. I thought I'd raised him better than this. It's not your fault, Isabel. Sean makes his own choices. She sighed heavily. Maybe, but I can't help feeling responsible. What can I do to help? I hesitated. I hate to ask, but I need to protect Elliot. Sean's spiraling, and I'm afraid he'll do something drastic. Say no more, Isabel said firmly. I'm on the next flight out. Relief washed over me. Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you. After we hung up, I found Elliot in the living room, half-heartedly picking up the mess Sean had left behind. Hey, sweetie, I said, kneeling beside him. How are you feeling? He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. Is Dad coming back? My heart clenched. I don't think so, honey. Not for a while. Elliot nodded, his little face scrunched in concentration. Good, he said finally. He scared you. I pulled him into a hug, blinking back tears. I'm okay, Elliot. We're going to be just fine. The next day passed in a blur of work and worry. I jumped at every noise, half expecting Sean to come crashing through the door again. By the time I picked up Elliot from school, my nerves were frayed. As we pulled into the driveway, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked across the street. A woman sat in the driver's seat, her gaze fixed on our house. Elliot, go inside and start your homework, I said, keeping my voice light. I'll be right there. I approached the car, my heart pounding. The woman rolled down her window, revealing a face I'd only seen in Facebook photos. Rachel, I said, crossing my arms. What are you doing here? Sean's girlfriend had the decency to look uncomfortable. I needed to talk to you about Sean. There's nothing to talk about. I snapped. He broke into my house last night. He's lucky I didn't press charges. Rachel's eyes widened. He what? Oh God, I'm so sorry, I had no idea. What did you think would happen when you got involved with an addict? She flinched. I thought I could help him, but things have gotten complicated. A chill ran down my spine. Complicated how? Rachel glanced around nervously. Sean's in trouble, big trouble. He owes some dangerous people a lot of money. That's not my problem anymore, I said, turning to leave. Wait, Rachel called. They know about Elliot. They've been asking questions. I froze, fear gripping my heart. What kind of questions? About his school, his routine. I think they might try to use him to get to Sean. The world tilted beneath my feet. I gripped the car door to steady myself. Why are you telling me this? Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Because I realized I'm in over my head, and because no child should suffer for their parents' mistakes. I nodded, my mind racing. Thank you for the warning. Now I need you to leave and never come near my family again. As Rachel drove away, I hurried inside, my hands shaking as I locked the door. Elliot looked up from his homework, his brow furrowed with concern. Mom, what's wrong? I forced a smile. Nothing, sweetie, just a little tired. I glanced at the clock. Grandma Isabel should be here soon. Why don't we make her favorite cookies to welcome her? As Elliot cheered and ran to the kitchen, I leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths. Isabel couldn't get here fast enough. We needed a plan, and we needed it now. The stakes had just gotten much, much higher. The moment Isabel walked through the door, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Her familiar perfume enveloped me as we hugged, and for a brief moment, I felt like a child again, safe and protected. Oh, Olivia, she said, pulling back to look at me. You look exhausted, dear. I managed a weak smile. It's been a rough couple of days. Elliot barreled into the room, throwing himself at his grandmother. Grandma, Izzy? Isabel's face lit up as she scooped him into her arms. There's my little man. My, you've grown. As Elliot chattered away about school and his latest art projects, I caught Isabel's eye. She nodded, understanding the unspoken message. We needed to talk. Once Elliot was settled in bed, Isabel and I sat at the kitchen table, mugs of tea steaming between us. Tell me everything, she said, her voice gentle but firm. I recounted Sean's break-in and Rachel's warning, my hands shaking as I spoke. Isabel listened intently, her brow furrowing deeper with each word. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. We'll fix this, Olivia. I have an idea, but it's not going to be easy. At this point, I'm willing to try anything, I said. Isabel took a deep breath. I'm going to offer Sean money. A lot of money, enough to pay off his debts and then some. I blinked in surprise. Isabel, that's incredibly generous, but... She held up a hand. There's a catch. In exchange, he'll sign away his parental rights, completely and irrevocably. The weight of her words hung in the air between us. Do you think he'd actually do it? I whispered. For the right amount, yes, I do. Isabel's voice was heavy with sadness. My son has proven time and time again that money means more to him than family. As much as it pained me to admit it, I knew she was right. Okay, I said, let's do it. The next morning, we put our plan into action. Isabel made the call while I paced nervously in the living room, Elliot safely at school. He agreed to meet, Isabel said as she hung up. This afternoon at the diner on Main Street. My stomach churned. I should be there. Isabel shook her head. No, dear, it's better if I handle this alone. Sean's more likely to let his guard down with me. As much as I hated it, I knew she was right. The hours crawled by. I jumped at every sound, half expecting Sean to burst through the door at any moment. When my phone finally rang, I nearly dropped it in my haste to answer. It's done, Isabel said, her voice tight. He signed the papers. Relief flooded through me, followed quickly by a wave of guilt. How did he seem? There was a long pause. Desperate, relieved, and completely unrepentant. Isabel's voice cracked. He didn't even ask about Elliot. My heart ached for her. I'm so sorry, Isabel. You shouldn't have had to do that. No, I'm glad I did, she said firmly. It needed to be done, for Elliot's sake. As we said our goodbyes, a noise outside caught my attention. I peered through the window, my blood running cold at what I saw. A black SUV was parked across the street, 2 men in dark suits standing beside it. As I watched, one of them pointed at our house. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The debt isn't settled. We know where the kid is. Panic gripped me. I ran to the door, fumbling with the locks, but as I yanked it open, ready to race to the school, I came face to face with Sean. His eyes were wild, his clothes disheveled. Olivia, he gasped, you have to help me. They're going to kill me. Behind him, I saw the men from the SUV approaching, their hands reaching inside their jackets. My mind raced. In that split second, I had to decide, slam the door on Sean and call the police, or let him in and potentially endanger Elliot. The choice I made would change everything. The weeks following Sean's desperate appearance at my doorstep were a blur of fear, exhaustion, and constant vigilance. I'd slammed the door in his face that day, my maternal instincts overriding any lingering sympathy. The men in suits had dragged him away, his pleas fading as I called the police with shaking hands. Now, as I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the pile of bills before me, I felt the weight of our new reality pressing down. The extra security measures, new locks, an alarm system, even self-defense classes had drained my savings. But I'd do it all again in a heartbeat to keep Elliot safe. A gentle ping from my laptop pulled me from my thoughts. Isabel's smiling face appeared on the screen, a welcome sight after so many sleepless nights. "Olivia, dear, how are you holding up?" I managed a weak smile. "We're managing, Isabel. How about you?" Her eyes crinkled with concern. "Oh, don't you worry about me. I'm more interested in how my grandson is doing." As if on cue, Elliot bounded into the room, his face lighting up at the sight of his grandmother. "Grandma Izzy!" For a few precious minutes I watched them chat, Elliot's laughter filling the room as Isabel regaled him with stories of her garden. It was moments like these that made all the struggle worthwhile. Once Elliot had run off to play, Isabel's expression turned serious. "Any word from Sean?" I shook my head. "Nothing since that day. The police say he's in the wind." Isabel sighed heavily. "I should have known the money wouldn't be enough. Olivia, I've been thinking that perhaps it's time for a fresh start, for all of us." My breath caught in my throat. "What do you mean?" "I have a summer house up in Maine. It's secluded, peaceful. Maybe you and Elliot could use a change of scenery. And, well, I wouldn't mind the company either." The offer hung in the air, tempting and terrifying all at once. Leave everything behind? Start over? I don't know, Isabel. My job, Elliot's school. She waved a hand dismissively. "Details, my dear. All solvable problems. Just promise me you'll think about it?" I nodded, my mind already racing with possibilities. After we said our goodbyes, I sat in silence, weighing our options. The idea of escape was intoxicating, but could I really uproot Elliot's life? A sharp knock at the door shattered my reverie. My heart leapt into my throat as I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. Rachel stood on my porch, looking haggard and afraid. Against my better judgment, I opened the door a crack. "What are you doing here?" "Please," she whispered, her eyes darting nervously. "I need your help. Sean's in trouble. Real trouble this time." I started to close the door, but her next words froze me in place. "They're going to kill him, Olivia. And then they're coming for Elliot." My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" Rachel's voice trembled. "The men Sean owes, they're not just loan sharks, they're human traffickers, and they think Elliot could fetch a good price." The world tilted beneath my feet. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself, bile rising in my throat. "Why should I believe you?" I managed to choke out. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "Because I've seen their operation. I've been helping Sean hide, but I can't do it anymore. I'm in too deep." My mind raced, weighing the risks. If Rachel was telling the truth, Elliot was in far more danger than I'd ever imagined. "But if it was a trap, please," Rachel begged. "I know I have no right to ask, but help us, for Elliot's sake." In that moment, I knew my decision would change everything. The safe, quiet life I'd been building for Elliot and myself hung in the balance. But could I live with myself if I turned my back on this threat, no matter how remote? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "Get inside," I said, opening the door wider. "Tell me everything." As Rachel stepped over the threshold, I silently prayed I wasn't making the biggest mistake of my life. The familiar chime of an incoming video call filled my living room. I settled in front of the laptop, eager to see Isabel's face. These calls had become a lifeline for both of us, a moment of normalcy in the chaos our lives had become. "Olivia, dear." Isabel's warm smile filled the screen. "How are you and Elliot holding up?" I forced a smile. "We're managing, Isabel. How about you? How was your doctor's appointment?" A flicker of confusion crossed her face. "Doctor's appointment? Oh, yes. It was fine, I think." My heart sank. This wasn't the first time Isabel had forgotten something important. I glanced at the sticky note I'd placed on the corner of my screen. "Ask about memory test results." "Isabel," I said gently, "do you remember what the doctor said about your memory?" She frowned, her eyes darting away from the camera. I'm not sure. It's all a bit fuzzy." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "The doctor mentioned some concerns, remember? They wanted to run some tests." Recognition dawned in her eyes, followed quickly by fear. "Oh, Olivia, I'm slipping, aren't I?" Tears pricked at my eyes. "We don't know anything for sure yet, but we'll face it together, okay?" Isabel nodded, visibly pulling herself together. "Of course, dear. Now let me see my grandson." I called Elliot over, watching as his animated chatter brought the light back to Isabel's eyes. But as he regaled her with tales of his latest school project, I noticed her struggling to follow along, asking the same questions multiple times. After Elliot bounded off to play, Isabel's facade crumbled. "I'm scared, Olivia," she whispered. "What if I forget him? What if I forget you?" "We won't let that happen," I said firmly, even as doubt gnawed at me. "We'll figure this out." As we said our goodbyes, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were losing Isabel, bit by bit. The one person who had stood by us through everything, who had helped us escape Sean's destructive influence, was now facing a battle of her own. I was so lost in thought that I almost missed the notification popping up on my screen. An email from an unknown address with a subject line that made my blood run cold. "We know where the boy is." With shaking hands, I opened the message. Inside was a single image, a photo of Elliot on the playground at his school taken earlier that day. Below it, a message: "The debt isn't settled. Meet us, or the kid pays." Panic clawed at my throat. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police, when another email arrived. This one contained a video. My finger hovered over the play button, dread pooling in my stomach. Sean's battered face filled the screen. "Olivia," he croaked, "I'm so sorry. They have me. They'll come for Elliot next. You have to run. Take him and go. Please, protect our son." The video cut off abruptly, leaving me staring at my own horrified reflection in the dark screen. My mind raced. We couldn't stay here, that much was clear. But where could we go? Who could we trust? Isabel's offer of her summer house in Maine suddenly seemed like a lifeline. Secluded, far from here, a place where we could regroup and plan our next move. But could I uproot Elliot's life so suddenly? And what about Isabel? In her deteriorating condition, could she handle such a drastic change? The sound of a car door slamming outside jolted me from my thoughts. I peered through the curtains, my heart pounding as I saw two men in dark suits approaching our front door. In that moment, I knew I was out of time. Whatever decision I made would change our lives forever. Stay and face whatever was coming, or run and leave everything behind. The doorbell rang, its cheerful tone a stark contrast to the terror gripping my heart. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. It was time to choose. The video call with Isabel had just ended, but something felt off. I moved to close the laptop when I realized Isabel's camera was still on. She must have forgotten to end the call on her end. I was about to disconnect when a movement caught my eye. A shadowy figure crept into Isabel's living room, careful to stay out of her line of sight. My heart stopped as I recognized the intruder, Sean. "Isabel?" I shouted, forgetting for a moment that she couldn't hear me. I watched helplessly as Sean rifled through drawers, pocketing what looked like jewelry and cash. Frantically, I dialed Isabel's number, praying she'd pick up. On the screen, I saw her reach for her phone, confusion etched on her face. "Olivia, didn't we just talk?" "Isabel, listen to me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Sean is in your house. He's stealing from you. Call the police right now." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then, "What?" "No, that's impossible. Sean wouldn't." A crash echoed through the phone and the video feed. Sean had knocked over a lamp, startled by Isabel's voice. Our eyes met through the camera, and for a second I saw the desperate, cornered look of a man with nothing left to lose. "Mom?" Sean's voice was shaky. "I can explain." "Get out!" Isabel's scream was filled with a fury I'd never heard from her before. "Get out of my house, you thief!" Sean bolted for the door, but not before grabbing a small safe from the bookshelf. My blood ran cold. I knew that safe contained Isabel's most valuable possessions and important documents. "Isabel, call the police now," I shouted. "I'm on my way." I ended the call and raced for my car, my mind whirling. How long had Sean been stealing from his own mother? Was this why she'd been so forgetful lately, constantly misplacing things? As I sped towards Isabel's house, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Got what I needed. The kid's next. You can't protect him forever." Terror gripped me. I'd been so focused on Isabel, I'd left Elliot vulnerable. I called my neighbor, begging her to check on him at his after-school program. Screeching into Isabel's driveway, I found her sitting on the front steps, looking shell-shocked. Police cars surrounded the house, their lights painting the quiet street in surreal flashes of red and blue. "Oh, Olivia," Isabel sobbed as I wrapped her in a hug. "How could he do this? My own son." Before I could respond, my phone rang. It was my neighbor. "Olivia, Elliot's not at the community center. They said a man claiming to be his uncle picked him up an hour ago." The world tilted beneath my feet. Sean had Elliot. All this, the break-in, the theft, it had been a distraction. A detective approached us, his face grim. Ma'am, we've got an APB out on your ex-husband, but I need to ask you some questions. I nodded numbly, my mind racing. How could I have been so blind? I thought cutting Sean out of our lives would solve everything, but I'd underestimated his desperation. And his cunning. As I recounted everything to the detective, a terrible realization dawned on me. Sean wasn't just running from debt now. He was running from the law, with my son as his hostage and bargaining chip. My phone buzzed again. Another text. Meet me at the old factory. Come alone, or you'll never see the kid again. I stared at the message, my heart pounding. Every instinct screamed at me to tell the police, to let them handle this. But I knew Sean. He was unpredictable, dangerous, if he felt cornered. I looked at Isabel, still shaken on the steps, then at the detective waiting expectantly for more information. In that moment, I had to make an impossible choice. Trust the authorities to save my son, or take matters into my own hands and risk everything. The weight of the decision pressed down on me like a physical force. Whatever I chose, there would be no going back. Elliot's life hung in the balance, and the clock was ticking. My heart pounded as I approached the old factory, its dilapidated structure looming against the darkening sky. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back to let the police handle this. But the thought of Elliot, scared and alone with Sean, propelled me forward. I'd managed to slip away from Isabel's house, leaving a vague note about following a lead. The guilt of lying to her and the police gnawed at me, but I couldn't risk Sean doing something desperate if he saw cops. As I neared the entrance, a figure emerged from the shadows. Rachel, Sean's girlfriend, her face pale and drawn. "Olivia," she whispered, "I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." I brushed past her. "Where's my son?" She grabbed my arm. "Wait. You need to know, Sean's not alone. The men he owes money to, they're here too. They're dangerous." "Olivia." Cold fear gripped me. "What do they want?" Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "They want Elliot to sell him, to cover Sean's debts." The world tilted beneath my feet. Human trafficking, my worst nightmare come to life. "Where are they?" I demanded, my voice barely recognizable. Rachel pointed towards a back entrance. "Third floor. But Olivia, you can't go alone. We should call the police." I was already moving, her pleas fading behind me. As I climbed the rusted stairs, I dialed 911, leaving the line open in my pocket. If nothing else, they'd trace the call. Voices drifted down the hallway as I reached the third floor. I crept closer, my heart in my throat. "Just a kid, man. This wasn't the deal." Sean's voice, trembling, a deeper voice responded, "The deal is whatever we say it is. You owe us, and the kid will fetch a good price." "Mom." Elliot's cry pierced the air, followed by the sound of a slap. Something in me snapped. I burst through the door, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The scene before me was chaos. Sean, bloody and bruised, stood between two menacing men and Elliot, who was tied to a chair. Another man held a gun, swinging it between Sean and my son. "Let him go," I snarled, surprising myself with the ferocity in my voice. The man with the gun turned, his eyes cold. Well, well, Mommy's here to save the day." Sean's eyes widened. "Olivia, run! Get out of here!" But I stood my ground. "I'm not leaving without my son." The gunman smirked. "Noble. Stupid, but noble. Here's the deal, lady. Your ex here owes us a lot of money. The kid's our insurance." "Take me instead," I said, my mind racing. I just needed to stall until the police arrived. "I'm worth more. I can work, pay off Sean's debt." One of the other men laughed. "Oh, we could definitely find a use for you." Elliot whimpered, and I met his terrified eyes. "It's okay, baby," I soothed. "Mommy's here." Suddenly, Sean lunged at the gunman. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. I screamed, rushing towards Elliot. Everything happened in a blur. More gunshots rang out. I reached Elliot, shielding him with my body. Glass shattered as figures in tactical gear rappelled through the windows. "Police! Freeze!" Relief washed over me as I untied Elliot, pulling him close. But as the chaos settled, I realized Sean wasn't moving, blood pooling beneath him. "Daddy?" Elliot's small voice broke through the commotion. I turned him away, my mind reeling. Sean, for all his faults, had tried to save us in the end. But at what cost? As paramedics swarmed in and police secured the scene, I clung to Elliot, the weight of everything that had happened crashing down on me. We were safe, but nothing would ever be the same. The detective from earlier approached, his face grim. "Ma'am, we need to talk about your ex-husband. And there's something you should know about his mother." My blood ran cold. What more could possibly go wrong? The sterile hospital corridor seemed to stretch endlessly before me as I made my way to Sean's room. Elliot's small hand clutched mine tightly, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and confusion. I'd debated bringing him, but in the end, I knew he needed this closure as much as I did. Outside Sean's room, Isabel sat in a wheelchair, her face a mask of grief and anger. The doctors had insisted she remain seated after her collapse upon hearing the news of Sean's involvement in Elliot's kidnapping. "Are you sure about this?" Isabel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, steeling myself. "We need answers, all of us." As we entered, Sean's eyes fluttered open. He looked small and broken in the hospital bed, tubes and wires snaking around him. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I'd once loved, before addiction and desperation had twisted him into someone unrecognizable. "Olivia," he croaked. "Elliot, Mom, I'm so sorry." Isabel wheeled herself to his bedside, her eyes flashing. "Sorry doesn't begin to cover it, Sean. You stole from me. You put your own son in danger. How could you?" Sean's face crumpled. "I never meant for any of this to happen. The gambling, the debts, it all spiraled out of control. I thought I could fix it, but you couldn't," I finished for him. "And instead of asking for help, you dragged us all into your mess." Elliot, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "Why did you take me, Dad? I was scared." Sean's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, buddy. I wasn't thinking straight. I thought if I had you with me, I could figure something out. But those men, they had other plans. I never would have let them hurt you, I swear." I felt a surge of anger. "You shouldn't have put him in that position in the first place, Sean. Do you have any idea what you've done to this family?" Sean looked away, unable to meet our eyes. "I know I've ruined everything. I don't expect forgiveness. I needed you all to know the truth about everything." Over the next hour, Sean laid bare the full extent of his addiction, the depths of his debts, and the desperate measures he'd taken. With each revelation, I felt a mix of horror and pity. The man before us was a shell of the person we'd once known. As Sean's strength waned, Isabel spoke up, her voice firm despite the tears in her eyes. "I can't do this anymore, Sean. I love you, but I can't watch you destroy yourself and hurt the people around you. When you get out of here, you're on your own." Sean nodded, a look of resignation on his face. "I understand. I don't deserve your help, any of you." I took a deep breath, knowing what I had to say next. "Sean, I'm filing for full custody of Elliot, and I'm getting a restraining order. Until you can prove you're clean and stable, you can't be a part of our lives." To my surprise, Sean didn't argue. "It's for the best," he said softly. "Elliot deserves better than what I can give him right now." As we prepared to leave, Elliot hesitated. Then, in a move that brought tears to my eyes, he hugged his father. "Get better, Dad," he whispered. In the weeks that followed, our lives slowly began to rebuild. Isabel, with proper medical care, showed improvement in her memory and overall health. She moved closer to us, becoming a constant, loving presence in Elliot's life. As for me, I found strength I never knew I had. The ordeal had tested me in ways I never imagined, but it had also shown me the depths of my resilience and love for my son. One evening, as Elliot, Isabel, and I sat around the dinner table, laughing and sharing stories, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. We had weathered the storm together, emerging stronger and more united than ever. Looking at my son's smiling face and Isabel's contented expression, I knew that despite the pain and hardship, we had found our way to a new beginning. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but with love, honesty, and the unbreakable bonds we'd forged, I was certain we could face whatever challenges lay ahead. As I tucked Elliot into bed that night, he looked up at me with those wise eyes of his. "Mom," he said softly, "are we going to be okay now?" I smiled, my heart full. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to be more than okay. We're going to be wonderful." And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. I was rinsing a handful of cherry tomatoes when I heard my husband Charles's phone ring. The water ran over my fingers, an ordinary moment on an ordinary Tuesday evening, until his voice stopped me cold. "He fell. How bad is it?" Charles asked, urgency sharpening his tone. I turned off the tap, tomatoes forgotten, and listened. His father, my father-in-law, had taken a bad fall at my sister-in-law's place. Blood, confusion, the blare of an ambulance siren through the speakerphone. After he hung up, the following moments became a blur of incoming calls. 2 of Charles's siblings, then a call from his mother that he put on speaker. "You need to get here now, Charles." His mother's voice cracked like a whip. "Your father's waiting in the ER alone." "I can't, Mom. Anna's just had her eye surgery, and I've got the kids to look after," he replied, stealing a glance in my direction, his eyes apologetic. Silence. "Then there's your daughter. Can't she deal with it?" "Those kids aren't even yours, Charles. Your dad should be your priority." Her words hit like a gut punch. Our 4-year marriage and the kids we'd been raising together, her grandkids, dismissed in a single breath. I watched as hurt flickered over Charles's face, then hardened into resolve. "No, Mom, my family needs me here. And those kids, They have been mine since the day I chose to love them. There was steel in his words, a finality that silenced any retort. We knew hospital policy. Due to the flu season, the ER was on lockdown. No visitors allowed, no exceptions. And with the cold snap outside, waiting in the parking lot wasn't an option. His siblings were silent, their expectations for him to abandon his immediate family clear, even if they would never say it outright. Only his mother had voiced that cruel sentiment. Charles reassured his siblings that he'd get updates and arranged to pick his dad up when he was released. As he ended the calls, Charles turned to me and our eyes locked. A silent agreement. We were in this together, today and every day that followed. And though we hoped for his father's swift recovery, we knew that some wounds in our family went deeper than the flesh. Our evening moved forward with a tense normality. Dinners were made, homework was checked, and our daughter was picked up from her dance class. But beneath it all ran a current of impending change. The house was quiet after the kids went to bed, a stark contrast to the uproar from earlier. Charles and I were left alone with our thoughts, the echoes of the call with his mother lingering in the air like the remnants of a bad storm. I could see it in his eyes, the turmoil. Your adult daughter can handle those things, his mother had said. Those aren't his real kids anyway. The words hung heavy between us, a spectral presence at our kitchen table. Sitting across from him, I braced myself for the conversation. Charles, I began, my voice steady though my hands were not. What she said about the kids. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration and fatigue. She's always been tough, you know that. But this, she crossed a line tonight. Your face when she said it, I murmured, recalling the pained expression that had flashed across his face. I've never seen you look like that before. Charles's gaze met mine, a silent storm behind his eyes. Anna, I don't care what she thinks. My dad's fall doesn't change the fact that our family comes first. Those kids, our kids, they matter more to me than her approval. But family is supposed to be there for each other, I countered, the advocate for reconciliation, even as my own heart balked at the coldness we'd been served. You're right, but family doesn't just mean blood, he responded firmly. Family means the people you choose to stand by, no matter what, the ones you sacrifice for, love, and protect. She may not see you and the kids as her family, but I do. That's all that matters. In that moment, I saw my husband not just as the man I loved, but as the pillar he truly was. Faced with the unthinkable, the stark dismissal from his own mother of the family he cherished, he stood unwavering. Silence settled as we took comfort in the strength of our bond, one his mother's words couldn't shake. We had each other, and we had our children, our family, built not on blood but on love and choice. I watched as Charles checked his phone again for any updates. His father was still being observed, now resting after receiving stitches for the gash on his head. Despite the tumultuous evening, a faint smile graced my husband's lips when he read his father was doing well. The moment was poignant, a clear declaration. We were still a family. And nothing, not harsh words, not cold judgment, and not even the frigid isolation his mother tried to thrust upon us, could tear that apart. The night waned, exhausting the silence until there was nothing left to do but retire and await morning's light. I lay beside Charles, watching the rise and fall of his chest as slumber took him. Sleep eluded me, though. My mind was a carousel of worry for my father-in-law and unspoken fears about the fractures in our family. Morning crept in like an unwelcome guest, casting a pall over what was once the sanctuary of our kitchen. The silence was oppressive as Charles and I prepared for the day, our gestures mechanical, the routine a mere echo of normalcy. It wasn't until the kettle whistled that we received the call from the hospital, relieving some of the tension with an update. My father-in-law had made it through the night, the doctors opting to keep him for observation due to the head injury, but noting his condition was stable. No visitors allowed. The voice on the other end reiterated it was policy, especially with the surge in flu cases. I glanced at Charles, noticing the wariness that had settled around his eyes. The isolation mandated by the hospital felt like an added insult, leaving my father-in-law to recover surrounded by the sterile white walls, devoid of the warmth of family. As we sat at the kitchen table, Charles broke the silence. "I'm going to call Dad," he declared, reaching for his phone with newfound determination. The conversation that followed was a mixture of relief and warmth. My father-in-law's voice, gravelly but still laced with his characteristic humor, filled the kitchen. "Ah, Charlie, don't you worry about me. Hospital food ain't my idea of a good time, but it'll do until they spring me out of here." Charles chuckled, a sound so needed and genuine it lifted the corners of my own mouth. "We've been worried, Dad," he admitted. How are you feeling, truly? There was a pause on the line, a softening. Like a young buck, my father-in-law joked, but then his tone grew serious. I'll be okay, son. Just keep taking care of those kids and Anna. You're doing right by them, you know that, don't you? They've been in my heart since the day you introduced them to me. The endorsement from his father, a man who'd never been one to express emotion freely, was a balm to the raw edges of Charles's spirit, and, by proxy, to mine as well. Through the sterile distance, his words reached us not as the necessary oxygen, but as the rarefied air of affirmation and love. That phone call didn't heal all wounds, but it did reinforce the notion that we were not entirely alone, despite the frigid policies and colder judgments from others. And while my father-in-law lay in that hospital bed, a discordant symphony of beeping machines his only company, he, too, knew his family was with him, in spirit, if not in body. We filled the rest of our day with mundane activities, as if by immersing ourselves in the simplicity of chores and errands, we could wash away the complexities of our situation. We were a unit, united and strong, and we resolved to stand as one, no matter what. Days blurred together as we waited for news of my father-in-law's condition, hoping each phone call would bring us closer to having him home. In the quiet between updates, doubts crept into my mind like unwelcome shadows. Over a cup of coffee one morning, Charles caught me staring blankly at the wall, my thoughts visible in the furrow of my brow. Hey, he said softly, reaching for my hand. Talk to me. I exhaled deeply, realizing the weight of my thoughts had become too heavy to shoulder alone. It's just... everything that's happened, it's making me see things differently. With your family, I mean. Your mom's words, the silence from your siblings, it's like now we know where we stand, and it's not where I thought. Charles squeezed my hand, his own concern visible. I know, he murmured. Believe me, I know. It's like a veil's been lifted, and now we're seeing the true colors of people I've known my whole life. We spoke candidly, the hurt and disbelief flowing freely between us. I shared my disappointment, especially regarding my sister-in-law. Our friendship had blossomed long before I married Charles, but now it felt like another casualty of the divide. I just can't wrap my head around it, I admitted. Karen and I have been close since we were kids. To think she's said nothing, done nothing. Charles let out a weary sigh. It hurts, I won't lie, but maybe it's not just about taking sides. They're dealing with Dad's injury in their own way. We've got to focus on us right now. But the simple declaration did little to assuage the ache. His mother's stinging rejection and the quiet complicity of his siblings had left a mark on our lives. We were at a crossroads. The path we once walked together with Charles's side of the family had forked, urging us to tread carefully into what felt like uncharted territory. I couldn't help but wonder if we would only drift further apart or if there was some way back to how things used to be. As we got up from the table, a silent agreement passed between us. Our relationship with Charles's family might never be the same, but perhaps, in time, we could redefine it. Maybe we could build something new, not reliant on approval, but standing firm on the foundation of our unit. Our family. The one we chose every single day. The holidays were upon us, a time when festivity was supposed to overshadow all else. This year, however, the joy was muted, the lights a little less bright, and the carols sounded more like melancholic echoes of happier times. What was traditionally a gathering of merged families became a stark reminder of the rifts created in what felt like another lifetime. Charles and I had chosen to host a small, intimate dinner rather than the usual large family gathering. It was a step back, a protective measure for the emotional well-being of our family. The house was decorated with care, a facade of normality, but the undercurrent of strain was palpable. On the day, when Charles's siblings arrived, there was a stiffness in their greetings, a formality that had never been part of our interactions before. We moved through the motions of the meal, exchanging pleasantries and the customary laughter, but it was like listening to a well-rehearsed play, every line predictable, no true emotion behind the words. Karen, my sister-in-law and once confidant, seemed especially distant. Occasional glances my way, which should have been comforting, only served as reminders of our now strained relationship. The bond we shared seemed reduced to nothing more than a shared history that we could no longer rely on. As Charles carved the turkey, his movements betrayed a slight tremor. It wasn't just from handling the knife, but from the weight of holding together a semblance of unity. Our children, keenly attuned to the shifted dynamics, were unusually subdued, their eyes often searching ours for reassurance. The conversations were forgettable, but one moment stood clear, when his mother offered a toast. To family, she said, her eyes briefly meeting Charles's, and to traditions that keep us together. The words should have warmed, but instead they burned. How could traditions bridge the gap when the foundation had crumbled? How could we speak of togetherness when her actions had so mercilessly shown us we were not truly part of the fold? Later, after the guests left and the lights dimmed, I found Charles standing by the window, looking out at the snow-blanketed world, a silent sentinel in his own home. As I approached, I understood that here stood a man torn between his love for his parents and siblings and his commitment to the family we'd created. The decorations gleamed dully in the background, a stark contrast to the warmth that typically filled our house during the holidays. The days that followed the holiday dinner were a quiet affair. The house returned to its usual routines, yet the air remained charged with the residue of unsaid things and unhealed wounds. My husband, usually the rock in turbulent seas, now wore a subtle cloak of sadness that no amount of cheer could lift. It was a few days post-holidays when Charles's phone rang, slicing through the silence of our evening. His mother's name flashed on the caller ID, and an involuntary tension gripped us both. He answered, her voice a faint murmur from the device. The conversation was brief, her tone softer, perhaps chastened by the season's spirit or the echo of her own words. "I've been thinking a lot," she had said. "I was out of line, Charles. I'm sorry." An apology so sought after now didn't carry the relief one would expect. I watched as Charles responded, his words measured. "Thanks, Mom, we just need some time, that's all." After he hung up, the space between us felt like a chasm that had suddenly shrunk. "She apologized," he said, almost to himself, as if testing the reality of what had occurred. We both knew it wasn't enough to erase the hurt, but it was a start. A door creaking open when we thought it might remain closed. It was clear that while his mother's words did not undo the damage that had been done, they laid the first stone on the pathway to rebuilding. Yet, the apology from his mother wasn't the only one we received. Karen, too, reached out, her message a mix of apology and explanation, a tentative offer to restore what had been broken down. It was my turn to sit with the words, weighing the possibility of a renewed friendship against the pain of betrayal. As the end of the year approached, we found ourselves in a reflective mood. Charles and I discussed long into the night what these gestures meant and how we should respond. The consensus was a cautious one, welcoming the chance to move forward, but with an understanding that our first commitment was to protect our family. The dynamics within the larger family had shifted, but we realized that it was within our power to shape how we let those changes affect us. Forgiveness was on the horizon, perhaps not immediate, but possible with time and genuine effort. Resolutions were made, not the New Year kind, but the kind that are etched into the framework of a family's principles. We resolved to let down our guard, but not our defenses, to approach with an open heart, but not with forgetfulness. And above all else, to ensure that the love within our walls was enough to sustain us through whatever lay beyond. Our story didn't end with the dropping of the ball or the stroke of midnight. It merely marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where the revelations of old wounds could guide the healing process. It promised a journey, not free from obstacles, but one we were ready to face as a family united.
I believe the job of a teacher is crucial in nurturing children who will shape our future. Shouldn't those who take on this role possess a strong sense of purpose and the basic courtesies of being a human being? The thought of someone unfit for teaching in such a position. Am I the only one that finds this frightening? My name is Matilda. I work as a teacher and am currently teaching world history at a middle school on Maui, Hawaii. Maui is about 2,360 miles away from San Francisco. It's usually a remote island with few flights, far removed from the urban image of San Francisco. I had my reasons for wanting to teach on a remote island, and as if by good timing, my husband Royce got transferred to a government office in Maui, which sped up our move here. Royce has a deep interest in regional revitalization and a strong sense of mission, dreaming of boosting tourism on remote islands. While my husband and I work in different fields, administration and education, we share a common desire to uplift areas that might be at a disadvantage compared to urban centers. But putting Royce's story aside for a moment, I became a teacher largely due to my parents' influence. My father, a former middle school principal, was elected to the city's education board for his achievements. My mother, after 25 years as an elementary school teacher, became an education advisor, offering guidance to struggling teachers and parents, earning widespread trust. Growing up watching my parents, I aspired to be like them. Though I never attended their classes, the praises I heard and the words of gratitude from their students and holiday cards showed their caliber as educators. As their daughter, I felt a mix of pride and happiness, and a deep desire to become a teacher like them. To become a teacher, obtaining a teaching license is essential. One must earn a degree from a college or junior college, complete teaching practice, and acquire the necessary credits. With a deep desire to understand education, I entered a national university of education. Lectures by renowned professors and connections with like-minded peers expanded my skills and boosted my motivation. During my college years, I had 2 significant experiences, or memories involving 2 people. One good, one bad, but which one should I start with? There was a volunteer education research group in college. This group actively exchanged ideas with other universities and focused on networking with like-minded individuals. At these regular meetings, not only were there social gatherings, but also opportunities to present our views. At one such meeting, I, representing my university, passionately spoke about my studies and my eagerness to excel as a teacher. After my presentation, the room erupted in applause and praise. A moment of great satisfaction and joy for me. It was then that Ruby, a fellow student from another university, approached me. "I felt disgusted by your naive and superficial speech. Can't you talk more realistically? It was a total waste of time." I was taken aback by Ruby's sudden and harsh words at our first meeting. I was merely expressing my aspirations as a teacher. I thought I was being realistic. "What exactly did you find unsatisfactory?" As I responded, Ruby turned red with anger, hurling irrational insults before leaving in self-satisfaction. I had never encountered someone like her before and was left dumbfounded. Then, another student from Ruby's university approached me with an apologetic look. "I'm sorry about my friend. She was irritable for not being selected as a speaker, and seeing your great presentation just set her off." This backstory, though enlightening, made me question how someone so self-centered and verbally abusive could be suited for teaching. In subsequent meetings, I encountered Ruby again. Her disdain for me seemed entrenched, as she continued to mock me and exhibit a sense of superiority, clearly pleased with herself. "You're not cut out to be a teacher. Your naive and weak-minded approach is exactly what I despise. Did you hear my presentation? It encompassed the entire reality and suggested future directions. It was infinitely more meaningful than your trivial talk. I don't want to see your face at these meetings. Why don't you just drop out of university?" These were just some of Ruby's words, but to me, her presentation was meaningless, self-righteous, and violent in its dismissal of opposing views. She mistook the silence after her presentation for awe at her brilliance. Encountering such a person was my biggest regret in attending these meetings. But apart from that, they were an excellent opportunity to broaden my horizons. As you've noticed, this was the unpleasant part of my story. Now, let me share something positive. An unavoidable step for obtaining a teaching qualification is participating in teaching practice. Many aspiring teachers work as tutors in learning centers for experience. I, too, had taught at a tutoring center, but felt a mix of nerves, anxiety, and excitement at the prospects of real school experience. My teaching practice began at a national high school affiliated with my university, allowing me to gain first-hand experience as a teacher. I learned a lot, often feeling overwhelmed, but I was determined not to let any of it slip through my fingers. Teaching practice, though just 3 weeks, led to a deep connection with one of my students. Rachel, a 9th grade student aspiring to be a teacher, often approached me with earnest questions. "Why did you choose to become a teacher, Miss Matilda? I wonder if I'm cut out for teaching. I'm anxious." There are many ways to be involved in education, right? I haven't formed a clear vision yet, so I'm not sure what to do. I took care to thoughtfully respond to Rachel's serious inquiries. Though I was not yet a teacher and lacked life experience, I saw myself in her and wanted to help. Rachel trusted me greatly, and though our time together was short, she considered me a mentor. On my last day, as I was leaving the school, she said, "I'll never forget meeting you, Miss Matilda. I'll work hard and seriously consider my path forward." Her words still resonate with me as if it were yesterday. A cherished memory with my first student. After graduating, I finally obtained my teaching license. Now, all that was left was to pass the recruitment exam to open the path as a teacher, but I had been contemplating deeply understanding education more. During my teaching practice, I saw Rachel struggling with her career path, and it made me wonder how to effectively convey meaningful information to someone like her. I wanted to delve deeper into both practical and theoretical aspects of education. So I decided to pursue graduate studies. In grad school, you set your own research theme and work towards it. I chose factors influencing approaches to personality development as my research topic. Simply put, it's about how to effectively engage with those seeking self-actualization. The research was more complex and challenging than I initially thought, but I found it incredibly fulfilling. I occasionally kept in touch with my first friend Rachel, who had decided to attend my alma mater. As for Ruby, a person I preferred to avoid, I heard from a friend at the meetings that she was hired as a teacher at a public high school in the city. Though I may not like her personally, it's always good to hear about someone you know succeeding. Torn between my eagerness to teach and my desire to learn more about education, I continued my grad school journey. Like in my undergraduate days, there were networking groups, and I joined them to broaden my horizons. The group included professionals interested in education, allowing me to discover worlds unknown to me, making each meeting exciting. It was at one of these meetings that I met Royce, my future husband. Royce, a public servant, was passionate and proud of his work, never sparing effort in his daily tasks. He was a great conversationalist, and our talks often set my heart racing. Eventually, I realized these flutters were signs of affection for Royce, which unsettled me as I had never been in a relationship before. Embarrassingly, I acted awkwardly around him several times due to my unfamiliar feelings. During this time of growing affection, Royce confessed his feelings for me, and we began dating, bringing me immense joy. As our relationship progressed smoothly and my graduate studies advanced, I finally graduated. I passed the teacher recruitment exam, was hired at a local high school, and received a marriage proposal from Royce. It was a time of significant beginnings in both my personal and professional life. Filled with high expectations of standing in front of students and interacting with them, I was ready to embark on my journey as a teacher. But a surprising event shattered these expectations. On my first day at the new school, I encountered someone I had hoped never to meet again, Ruby. By some twist of fate, she was working as a teacher at the same school I was assigned to. After my introduction on the first day, Ruby quickly started her harassment. "I'm surprised someone like you could become a teacher. How many years has it been since you graduated? And now you're just starting as a newbie? How incompetent can you be?" She scoffed. But I chose not to mention my graduate studies. It seems like an unnecessary hassle. When I remained silent, Ruby seemed to take it as a cue to continue her tirade against me. Despite years passing since our university days, her relentless animosity towards me was almost frightening. My subject was world history, and Ruby taught mathematics. Though our interactions were minimal due to our different subjects, Ruby always found a way to interfere. It was particularly burdensome when Ruby joined the committee for a school event. She had no business with my classes, but she would say, "Poor students having to endure your class. Luckily, they have my superior lessons as salvation. My students say they find my classes interesting and easy to understand." On the other hand, I never heard anything positive about Ruby's classes. I tried to ignore her, but that seemed to annoy her even more, making her provocations unbearable. A year of being tossed between my dream teaching life and the nightmare that was Ruby passed, and I was finally approved for my long-desired position at a remote island middle school. I wanted to implement my research theme, educational approaches to environmental differences, in a practical setting. Fortunately, Royce also received an assignment to the same island, allowing us to relocate together. When my transfer was confirmed, Ruby approached me, laughing. "Going to the countryside? Perfect for an incompetent like you. It's like being a fallen warrior." "It's for my research and a new challenge. Calling it countryside is disrespectful to the islanders." Unable to ignore her rude remark, I retorted only for her to laugh, and belittle my career choices, claiming it was pathetic. Convinced she was right, there was no reasoning with her. I'm transferring to a prestigious private high school. They specifically asked for someone as capable as me. Ruby proudly boasted about being hired at a prestigious school. One a banished incompetent, the other an excellent and beautiful female teacher. The contrast couldn't be clearer. Her comments about exile and beauty were so ridiculous that I just nodded and left. The students on the island, still somewhat naive compared to city high schoolers, were pure and sincere. I dedicated myself to my new teaching role. Royce, too, was working hard at his new job, boosting the island's tourism. 3 fulfilling years passed in this nature-rich environment, working and focusing on my research. Then I was invited to present my research findings at a conference in the city. The prospect of returning to the mainland filled me with anticipation, and Royce was able to join me on his vacation. The feeling was like a mini vacation. The conference venue was bustling with education professionals. Royce came to listen to my presentation, and his support in my nervous state was invaluable. When Royce left to greet someone he recognized, I heard a familiar voice from behind. "Why are you here? This is a distinguished educational conference, not a place for a fallen warrior." I hadn't expected to encounter such a noisy woman here. "Are you presenting something? You should probably not, just to avoid embarrassment." Ruby started talking fluently about how she was asked to attend this conference because of her performance at the famous school, even though I hadn't asked. Her condescending tone and manner were extremely irritating. "It's my turn to present next. I'll let you watch so you don't despair over the difference between us." Ruby walked away, seemingly pleased with herself, but I was worried about her. I doubted whether she could make a decent presentation. And, as I suspected, Ruby's presentation turned out to be remarkably insubstantial. It was so lacking. It might be more accurate to say there was nothing there at all. Ruby's presentation lacked substantial data to support her theories, and her speaking skills were poor. Moreover, she spent much time bragging about irrelevant things. More than half of her talk was meaningless. The awkward atmosphere in the hall after her presentation reminded me of our university days. Apparently sensing the mood, Ruby quickly left the stage. During the 30-minute break, Ruby approached me again. Really, my sophisticated speech was probably too complex for ordinary people. "I grace you with my presence, and this is the thanks I get?" She loudly accused me in front of everyone, questioning how I managed to get the final slot in the program. She yelled loudly even though there were many people around her. Royce was beside me, astonished, as I had told him about this peculiar woman. He whispered, "Now I see." Ignoring her, Ruby got more agitated, calling me a low-intelligence teacher with no value. Her loud voice attracted everyone's attention. Then someone spoke up in my defense. "Matilda is a wonderful teacher, very different from a fake like you." It was Rachel, my first student during my teaching practice. We had maintained a close relationship as she attended my alma mater. Rachel, after much contemplation and my advice, decided to support teachers rather than teach herself. She now worked for the Board of Education and was involved in organizing this conference. "Ruby, I've heard quite a lot about you. My job keeps me well informed," Rachel said. Startled at first, Ruby quickly regained her composure and retorted, "Such insolence from a worthless teacher and a young girl. Go away, you're useless." Then an angry voice echoed, "Who are you speaking to like that?" It was the chairman of the City Teachers Union. Ruby turned pale upon realizing who it was. "Matilda's father is the educational director of the Board of Education, and her mother is a highly respected educational critic," the chairman explained. Ruby immediately protested, accusing me of nepotism. "Daughter of the educational director? That's favoritism, so unfair." "Your narrow-mindedness is showing. Matilda's parents are just her background. Her invitation to this conference is due to her own achievements, Dr. Matilda." "Wait, doctor? What do you mean?" Ruby was confused. After completing my master's degree, I faced a dilemma about my career path. Torn between teaching and future research, I chose research. I continued the doctoral program and earned my PhD. Upon graduation, I asked the professors who wanted me to stay at the university if I could gain some practical experience by teaching. I had accumulated significant research on island education, and my long-term thesis was complete. This conference was an opportunity to present my findings. Then Royce, who was listening, said, "That was Ruby, right? We've been noticing a lot of issues with her. Discussions are underway whether to let her continue teaching." "What are you talking about? Who are you?" Ruby murmured in a fading voice, her face turning pale. "Royce is a civil servant. Specifically, a national civil servant with a position in the U.S. Department of Education. He was on assignment to the island as part of a personnel exchange with the Ministry of the Interior, working on a rehabilitation program for problematic teachers. Because of this, he kept receiving updates about such teachers. The chairman's words, 'You better be prepared,' made Ruby kneel, cover her face, and cry. After my presentation, I received thunderous applause. Ruby had quietly disappeared from the venue. Royce and I had been assigned to the island for 3 years. I was expected to return to the university, and Royce's secondment was ending, so he was returning to the Department of Education. We moved back to the city together just as we had arrived. We invited Rachel to our new home. I'm always grateful to your father, the education director. My dad also speaks highly of you, Rachel, calling you a capable and reliable staff member. Thanks for your help this time," I added. I knew about Ruby from you and thought she couldn't possibly be fit for teaching. A little investigation revealed a lot of issues. It wasn't difficult. Ruby's professional attitude was the worst, with no good reputation. She had managed to behave well during her transition to the private school, but her luck ran out, exposing her true capabilities and unsuitability for teaching. Her job at the private school was a 3-year contract, and she forced her way into the conference to try to extend it. Her participation in the conference, let alone her dreadful presentation, was unthinkable. Her plan to extend her contract through the conference ended in a disastrous result. The principal of the prestigious school, upon learning about her presentation and behavior at the conference, promptly terminated her employment. Ruby's misconduct led to her being sent to a rehabilitation program, but she foolishly fled, unable to cope. Ruby's abandonment of her duties has raised serious doubts about her suitability. A hearing for revoking her teaching license has begun. According to him, the revocation of her license was almost certain. Royce returned to his former position, finalizing the rehabilitation program, and was appointed leader of a new project. Rachel was making strides as a leader in reforming the working conditions of educational staff. I returned to the university to teach. Although it's different from teaching at middle and high schools, it's enjoyable and fulfilling, and I'm continuing my research, exploring new methods of education. I dream of my research nurturing the children of the future, making every day rewarding.